of English Linguistics 315. Today we are going to get into the next subsection of linguistics, that is phonology. We just wrapped our first subsection, which was articulatory phonetics, and now we are going to get into the second subsection this week. So, just a note about how the class is going to progress. We are going to build on what we already know from the phonetics section. So, if you have any questions or clarification regarding the first section, feel free to come into my face-to-face office hours. These are on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 1 and 3. But I will also be happy to set up a Skype appointment with you if you cannot make it to my office hours, or I will be happy to answer emails, questions over email. So you have new readings for this week. This is pages 77 to 89 of chapter 3 in your textbook. And I do hope that you have been reading your textbook. As you saw from your pop quiz 1, you could have a question from your textbook, for example. But just a note that nothing that you read is going to feature in your midterm, for example. So you don't have to worry about memorizing anything in this class, because the midterm, as you will see, is more like your lab sections. I will give you problems to do. I will give you things to transcribe and, problems to do. That's really what I'm looking to test in the midterm and the finals, but you will not see like a fill in the blank question or a multiple choice question in your midterm. So, just to review where we are, this is the fundamental question that we have been asking this entire class and what we've been concerned with this entire semester. What is a system of rules and mental representations that underlie our ability to speak and understand a human language? And one of the answers that we saw to this question was the International Phonetic Alphabet. And so now you are familiar with how to transcribe English into IPA. You have the IPA handout, and you know that it is a really good way of representing because it is completely unambiguous. What we are going to see in this unit is that another way of approaching this question is to look at how we can understand the rules that operate over the speech sounds and what these rules are. And that unit is what we call as phonology. When we look at phonology, the first thing that we look at are the speech sounds that are producing the word, right, that are making up the word. And what are the sequences in which these speech sounds can actually occur? So why are some speech sounds okay in English and why are some speech sounds not okay in English? And what are the rules that actually operate over what makes something grammatical and what makes something ungrammatical? So the first thing that we talk about when we talk about phonology are syllables. So what is a syllable? So let's look at the word understanding. Now you know how to read IPA. So I have written understanding in IPA. And so I want you to pronounce this out loud for me. And you will do something like this: understanding. And so what you do is you naturally break up words into beats and rhythms, right? So you are doing ta, 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 ta when you're doing understanding, understanding, right? And so it's a natural beat, it's a natural rhythm that you are breaking up this into. I've given you another word. I want you to read that out aloud as well. And so many of you will read this as beautiful, right? Beautiful, right? You say it together, so when you say it in fast speech, it's very different. But when you break it down slowly, you will see that you get these kind of rhythm and beat. So this natural rhythm that you break things into, that is what we mean by a syllable, right? So a syllable is the natural breaking of a word into smaller pieces, right? It's a sound structure according to the sound structure of that particular word. So what we know when we know what a syllable is all of us break things up the same way. We break words up the same way. So for understanding, nobody is going to do understanding. stand, and ing. You know that that's not a natural way of breaking up this word, and that's not how you would pronounce this particular word. Neither would you pronounce things like bir, utif, and ul, right? So you have an intuitive understanding of how syllables actually work in English, and that is where your knowledge of phonology actually comes in. So you know how to divide words up into syllables, and this is represented in your cognition. This is represented in your brain. How is this actually represented in your brain? Well, we already saw from the last couple of modules that memory or memorization really is not the way to think about this. So, when you talk about understanding, or breaking up beautiful, you're not learning this by memorization. You're not learning this when somebody else is pronouncing it and then you are kind of repeating it. What you're actually doing is you know how to phonetically produce this particular word or represent this particular word in your cognition, but you also know something called syllabification. You also know how to syllabify this particular word. So that's the wrong hypothesis. Like I said, you don't actually do this on a memory basis, right? So the problem with this, and as you know, I like to illustrate things just to drive home the point. So we are going to see how syllabification actually works with a made up word of English. This is Badartogly, and I'm not going to read it because I want you to actually read this word silently to yourself for the first time. And so if you've done that, now I want you to say it again slowly, but I want you to break it into the beats or the rhythm of this particular word. Can you do that out loud? All right. So I would bet that most of you actually would say something like bad, ar, tug, lee, right? Dividing it up into 4 different beats and rhythm and kind of breaking it into its natural sounding smaller pieces. Most of you would have said bad, ar, tug, lee, and none of you, or very few of you, would have actually said bad, art, ugly, because that's not a natural way of actually breaking this word up. So if it was memory, then you wouldn't have been able to syllabify it the way that you actually did, right? So the way that you actually understand syllables and know how to break up words into smaller pieces is because you are using a general rule of English syllabification, right? And so that is what we are going to see in this unit. How do we actually break up words into smaller pieces, and how does syllabification actually work in English? So I have defined what is phonology for you. It is a study of the general rules that govern how words are pronounced in language. So we will be concerned with the rules that are governing speech sounds in language. And so let's get into syllabifying the words. But before we get into the specific rule of how we do syllabification, we need to talk about syllables, right? So syllables consist of 3 things. It consists of an onset, it consists of a coda, and it consists of a nucleus. The nucleus is the single most important thing in the syllable. If you don't have a nucleus, you most likely don't have a syllable. The reason is because the nucleus is most likely the vowel of that particular syllable. So it's often the sound in the middle and very often the vowel. And the onset is the consonants that begin the syllable. It's very often the first letter or the second letter, the first 2 letters form the onset, and then the coda are the consonants that end the syllable. So there's 3 parts to syllables. Now, it's not the case that every syllable needs to have an onset, a coda, and nucleus. So here are some syllables that do not have onsets. These are words like it. So I is a nucleus and t is the coda. And so there's nothing in the onset position. And then some syllables do not have codas, and this is the word for T. You have t, which is in the onset position, and e, which is a nucleus, and nothing in the coda position. But every syllable has a nucleus, as you can see. So even the most simple word of English, like a, right, your indefinite determiner, has a nucleus because it is composed of only a vowel with no onset and no coda position. So here are some syllables that I have broken down according to the onset nucleus and coda. So the word ban, for example, has b in the onset position, a in the nucleus, and then n in the coda position. And then spray is a complex onset. We call that a complex onset because you have s, b, and uh, forming the complex onset, right? So there are three consonants in the onset position, and then you have the vowel in the nucleus position and no coda. And then an is when you don't have an onset, and then you only have a nucleus and a coda. So I want you to treat the diphthong as one. So don't break up the diphthong into two parts. The diphthong always forms part of the nucleus, right? I want you to treat that as one. Now, you know that there are some word sounds or speech sounds that are possible combinations in English, and there are some others that are not possible combinations in English. So, how do we know what is a possible onset and what is a possible coda in English? So, I want us to consider these made up words again. And so, these are mbaka, nacho, sa, nuch, antagonist. And I want you to read it out for yourself. And I want you to answer this question: which one of these sounds actually sounds most like English to you? So I'll let you have a minute to do this, read out the words, and then decide which one sounds most like an English word. You probably said tagnisp because this is the one where you have t in other words of English in the onset position, g as codas in other English words, n is a possible onset in other English words, and so p is a possible coda, given what you know about other words of English. So why don't these words sound like English? Well, with Impaka, you see that there is no word of English that can start with m and b, right? And so you know that this probably sounds like an African language to you, but it doesn't sound like English to you because m and b is not a possible onset. With ngato, again, you don't have other words of English that actually start with the engma, with the velar nasal, and so this is again not a possible onset of English. With the sa, again, you can see that t and sa is not a possible onset. Very often, my students tell me that tsunami is a word of English and it starts with t and sa, and that is true. It's a word that starts with t and sa, except that tsunami is not English. It's actually Japanese, and English borrowed it. So the word tsunami, the phonotactics of tsunami is not English, it's Japanese. And then with nuksh, we can see that k and ch, the affricate, is not a combination that you find in other words in the coda position of English, and therefore tagnus was the only one that fits the bill. So, what do we call these kind of constraints where you know that there are certain onsets that are not possible in English and there are certain codas that are not possible in English? These are called as phonotactic constraints, right? Phonotactic constraints. Phono meaning sound and tactic meaning arrangement. So phonotactic constraints are how the sounds can be arranged in a particular word, and this is what determines what possible onsets and what possible codas can occur in the words of a language. And so now you know how the composition of a syllable, you know the phonotactic constraints of language, and now what we are going to see is how do we actually syllabify a particular word. So this is where we come to the syllabification algorithm, and I am going to again use the whiteboard behind me to do this so that you will have an illustration of this. So I hope you can see that. All right, let's go back to the slide. And so the syllabification algorithm, there are four main steps of the syllabification rule. And what we will see is that we will illustrate this with our made-up word, Bada Tugly. And I highly recommend you to do this at home with me as I'm doing this on the board. But what we first do is we write the word, leave some space because we will be writing stuff up So I want you to write the word bad art tugly. Right? So write the word bad art tugly in IPA. So that's the first thing for you to remember, that when you're doing syllabification algorithm, you want to do things in IPA. All right? The first main step of our algorithm is to label and identify the nuclei. Remember what I said about the nucleus. Most likely the vowel is the nucleus of the syllable. So let's identify the nucleus, and we are going to use N for nucleus. So A is a vowel, right? This is a vowel, this is a vowel, and this is a vowel. So this is already suggesting to you that there are 4 syllables to this made up word, and we will name them N, 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 suggesting that they are nucleus, right? So this is what we just did. We identified all the vowels in the word, and then we label them as an N. The second step for us is to identify the onsets and label them as an O. So let's look, again, we go from left to right because that's how we write English. So B is the first onset that we see, and so that is left of the vowel, so that's an onset, right? And then we have D, right? We have D, and that is again to the left of the nucleus, so we can actually write that again as an onset, because that's a possible onset. And then you see that we have 2 consonants over here with the R and the T. Now, can you think of any word of English that actually starts with R and T in the onset position? You probably won't be able to, because R and T doesn't form a natural onset of English. So what you do then is you leave the first consonant aside, and then you take the consonant immediately to the left, the vowel, and you label that as the onset, right? So you leave this guy and you take this guy to be the onset. And now you come to the next 2 consonants immediately to the left of the nucleus. And this is a G and the L. Do you think that a sound, G and L, is a possible onset of English? Yes, because there are other words that start with G and L, the onset position, like glee, right, for example. So what you do is you combine these 2 like this, and you write that as an onset. So this is what we call a complex onset, right? So once we identify all the onsets, and I have a tip on how to find onsets, my basic answer is you have to use your intuition. Very often you want to ask, can a word of English start with this sequence of phones? And if it does, then it's a possible onset. If it doesn't, well, drop one of the consonants and you go to the consonant immediately to the left of the vowel, and that is the onset. Step 3 of the algorithm is to identify the coda, and as you can see, there's only one coda in this entire word, and that is the R. And so we identify that as the coda, and now so we have marked all the speech sounds either as an onset or a nucleus or a coda. And now the last step is to add syllable labels. So the way we do it is we identify onset and nucleus together, combine them like that. Here we have an onset, nucleus, and coda. So we combine them together like that. We combine these 2 together and these 2 together. And then we write this syllable symbol, which is written like this. That's the symbol for syllable, right? And then we also put a dot at the bottom. So we divide this up like that. So now you know that these are 4 syllables, or you can also do 1, 2, 3, 4 if you want, right? You don't have to, but you can do that if you want. And so now what we get is a word of English, a made up word of English in its natural syllabification, because we have used what is known as the syllabification algorithm to do this, right? So step 1, identify the nucleus. That tells you how many syllables there are. Then you identify the onsets according to your intuition of what's a possible onset of English. You identify the remaining consonants as the coda, and then you identify the syllables. You put the syllables, you put the dots, and that is the end of the syllabification algorithm, right? So it's really easy if you follow the rules that I've just given you, right, according to the different steps. So what I want you to do at home is I want you to practice the syllabification algorithm. And I've given you two words to do this. I've given you understanding and beautiful that we saw towards the beginning of this class. And what I want you to do is I want you to syllabify this. First, write it into IPA, and then you syllabify this on the basis of the syllabification algorithm that we just saw. This is going to give you an idea of the next lecture for this week. All right, I will see you in that lecture.